It's probably safe to say that the majority of us who are here tonight have some experience or exposure with French New Wave cinema, which is why we're all here tonight. But for those of us for who this may be new territory, the French New Wave was the original indie cinema, if you will, where young filmmakers who were in their mid-20s dispensed with the old protocols of filmmaking and used whatever resources were available to them at the time. So for example, they used their friends as extras, which we will see later on this evening. New technology provided them with lightweight cameras, so they were able to shoot on location in their friends' homes. They were able to shoot on the streets of Paris. Paris was always the backdrop to these films. And they did everything on a shoestring budget. These young Turks believed that new films should aim not to lull the audience with the comfort of ritual within the darkness of the movie house, but rather to unsettle and to provoke greater reflection. You see, at this time, the filmmakers believed that their job was no longer to tell a story, but rather to make a film in which the spectator will discover a story. They were banking on the existence that the audience was lucid and ultimately as creative as they were. Now, to understand where they were coming from, we need to speak just a little bit about World War II and the German occupation of northern France. Hitler had mandated that all film that was created before 1937 was to be completely destroyed and wiped out of history. And so you have filmmakers and film enthusiasts alike, people like Henri Langlois, who established the Cinémathèque Française the year before, in 1936, made great efforts to protect this medium and save it from total annihilation. By the 1930s, cinema had already been accepted as a legitimate art form and was recognized for its historical value and importance, particularly the older films from the Lumiere brothers from the 1890s and many of the silent films from the 1910s. So people involved in the arts made these wonderful efforts to save all of what we'll call the world cinema, European cinema, by hiding it in all of the places that we're now familiar with where fine art was hidden during the war. So for example, in the attics of country manor homes, in the basements, in wine cellars, the empty wine barrels in the wine cellars, anywhere that thousands and thousands of reels of film could be protected. But what's rather paradoxical and kind of strange about this is while great efforts were being made to destroy all of the world cinema, paradoxically, cinema in France actually thrived. In fact, it was an industry that thrived almost greater than any other industry in France at the time. And film production continued. And in fact, movie attendance rose by 40% in 1943. And one can possibly conjecture because a year earlier, in 1942, all public and private dance events had become prohibited, and all of the dance halls were shut down. So it was theater and cinema were the only outlets for escapism to boost public morale, and also on a very basic human level. These were the only places, or very few of the places that had heat in the winter months. Many of the homes and the apartments during the war years did not have heat. So the public went to the theater and to the cinema to be together, to talk about the latest events, and to stay warm. all theater and cinema events the performance had to be over by 10 o'clock, 10:30-ish, because there was a curfew. There was 11 p.m. curfew. So all of the streets had to be empty of people, and they had to be sure if they were commuting from the cinema to their homes to be on the last metro, so that they wouldn't be arrested because of the curfew. And if anyone is familiar with the Truffaut film from 1980, The Last Metro, this is where The Last Metro gets its name from. The films that were being made at this time were very heavily monitored and censored, so there could be absolutely no political implication at all. What was permitted were adaptations of novels, costume dramas, and musicals. So if you think what you might see on PBS on Sunday night, adaptations of novels, costume dramas, musicals, this was okay. And this is what the young new wave directors were growing up on. When the war came to its close, and films came out of hiding and began to be screened again, cinematic culture thrived. And as soon as it was freed from its semi-clandestinity imposed by the occupation, film clubs began to form. And at this time also, American films were heavily imported as a provision by the Blum-Burns trade agreement. And that was instituted to pay off France's multi-billion-dollar war debt to the United States by opening French markets to American culture products, particularly films. And in fact, the McMahon Theater only screened, is a single theater, the McMahon Theater is a single screen theater in Paris, which is still in operation today after 80 years, exclusively screened only Hollywood films at this time. And if you look at this film still, this comes from Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless. You see Gene Seberg standing in front of the McMahon Theater. The facade of the McMahon Theater looks very similar to this as it did in the 1960s when this was shot. The film that's being screened is a 1949 film by Otto Preminger called Whirlpool. Here you see it under the French title, The Mysterious Dr. Corbeau. And the reason that I'm pointing this out and why it's relevant is because burgeoning film directors were now being exposed to and influenced by foreign directors. Jean-Luc Godard included this one sheet at the McMahon Theater intentionally as a way of paying homage to Otto Preminger, who's a man that he would have admired and whose films would have been familiar to him. The burgeoning directors being exposed to and influenced foreign directors were now seeing films by people like Otto Preminger, Alfred Hitchcock, John Ford, who were producing films in Hollywood. We had Vittorio De Sica in Italy, Ingmar Bergman in Sweden. And in fact, our title card this evening, this is a film still from a William Klein 1966 film called Qui Vu Polly Magoo? Who are you, Polly Magoo? And if you look at Polly Magoo, she's the title character shown in this still, you will notice her uncanny resemblance in styling to Bergman's 1957 The Seventh Seal. She's styled looking like death. So once again, this was a petite homage from one director to another, saying, I admire your work, I appreciate you. And it was also like a secret code between film directors and film enthusiasts alike to see who would catch the references. And Jean-Luc Godard has even done this, he has referenced himself in his 1962, it's called a musical, there's only one song in the musical, which is sung a cappella, sort of. Alternately with an orchestra and without orchestra, it's a very Godardian vehicle. But John Belmondo's character says in so many words, I need to get home tonight because Breathless is on television. and this was done over and over and over again by these directors. At this point in the 1950s, movie attendance was bigger than ever, and the industry remained consistent. And a network of left-wing cinema clubs were set up in France. Many of them were under the control of the PCF, which was the French Communist Party at the time, who looked towards culture as a key recruiting ground. And it was this rising popularity of cinema clubs that fostered the need for film digests. And ladies and gentlemen, this is where it gets important and the lecture gets good. Cahiers du Cinema, bound in its original yellow covers, without overstating, is partly responsible for writing the history of 20th century cinema. And everyone should have received a copy of Cahiers du Cinema tonight, bound in its original covers, with a very attractive photo of a very young, handsome man on the cover. The photo was taken at a cafe on Boulevard Bonne Nouvelle. This is a main thoroughfare in the 10th arrondissement, where Jean-Luc shot many of his early films. In front of you, we see a scene from Trouffaut's film, The 400 Blows. And you have a young Jean-Pierre Léaud with Patrick Offay ogling a lobby card of Harriet Anderson from Bergman's 1953 picture, Summer with Monica. Once again, it's one director tipping his hat to another director who he admired very much and who's, in these early years, styled himself off of. Jacques Dalnel-Belcroze, remember this image, this face. He plays the husband in the first film that we'll see tonight. Was one of the co-founders of Cahiers du Cinema, along with André Bazin and Joseph Marie-Leduc in 1951. And it was their editorial staff that included a powerhouse of young iconoclast film directors. They were right-bank journalists who served among the very first editors here at Cahiers. And part of that team was Jacques Rivette. He was very handsome. He's often regarded with having directed the very first and the very last of the French New Wave films. The first film that we'll see tonight, Coup de Bergère, this film was made in 1956, and this is what shepherded in the era. In 1971, his 13-hour epic Out One essentially ended the era. It had run its course by 1971, but this film really unofficially / formally marked the end of that particular era. Francois Truffaut, he's 27 years old in this photo. He had just won the Best Director Award at the Cannes Festival in 1959. Many of us may be familiar with The 400 Blows. The 400 Blows is now widely considered to be one of the best French films in the history of cinema. Jean-Luc Godard, he's shown here with his wife at the time, Anna Karina. We'll see them in our third picture tonight. He burst into critical acclaim with one of the most influential examples of French New Wave cinema, which is Breathless. Breathless was based on an idea and loosely based on a screenplay by Francois Truffaut. Breathless became one of the most viewed films of the French New Wave cinema and attracted over 2 million people when it was first released in 1960 for its bold visual style, which included an unconventional use of editing and a modern jazz soundtrack by Marshall Salah, and the 12-tone piano theme that plays throughout Breathless has, in later years, essentially become synonymous with French New Wave, and has really, over the course of time, become the soundtrack to the era. This scene of Belmondo and Jean Seberg on the Champs-Elysees has also become one of the most iconic scenes of the French Nouvelle Vague. She, of course, is walking along the Champs-Elysees, peddling copies of the New York Herald Tribune, and we'll see who wears it better. I think we know the answer to that. It was here at Cahiers de Cinema where these talented writers could live and breathe movies. They could argue and debate over the latest screenings. They could find the right words to justify their passions. And they could also meet some of the directors who they admired and loved over the years, who they had grown up on. And it was this total immersion at Cahiers that provided these young writers an education on how to write about film, how to write film, how to make film, and many of them went on to become among the best directors of the 20th century. The magazine really drew its polemical energy from this remarkable combination of individuals who made up its first editorial group. Now, across the Seine, on the opposite side of the river on the left bank, there was a young female photographer who became interested in making films. And when Agnes Varda died last March at 91 years old, she has been credited for having directed over 50 films in her 60-year career. Some of us may have seen parts of her retrospective at Lincoln Center in December and earlier this month. She's shown here in this slide with her husband, Jacques Demy. Jacques Demy was also a director. He's known for The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which was a musical. The music was composed by Michel Legrand. We'll hear Michel Legrand's music in the third film tonight. Oops. Michel Legrand is shown here with Corinne Marchand. This is a film still from Agnes Varda's 1961 film, Cleo 5 to 7. We will see an excerpt of Cleo 5 to 7 tonight. So with that, we're ready to screen the films. So I'm going to have Karen come lower the lights. She's going to be assisting me with changing the DVDs. All of these films are on different DVDs, so we ask that you be patient as we change the discs over the course of the night. There's going to be a little bit of pause between the two to remove the other disc, put the new disc in, go through the menu, etc. But you'll need to remain seated. There won't be that much time. So, off we go. The first film that we're going to see tonight is called The Coup de Bergère. It's by Jacques Rivette. It was directed in 1956. It's 30 minutes long, and as we discussed, it's regarded as the first of the New Wave films. Coup de Bergère, the term Coup de Bergère, is the name for a 4-move chess play to win a checkmate in 4 moves. It's a way that amateurs can, or the way that experts can defeat amateurs very, very quickly. You will notice in the opening credits the chess game that's playing. It's a reference to this, and also the metaphorical chess game that the husband and wife are playing throughout the film. This film stars Jacques Delcroze, who you remember was one of the co-founders of Cahiers de Cinema. He plays the role of the husband, and you will not see his name in the credits. You'll see his name as a pseudonym, Etienne Boineau. Virginia Vitry is his wife. Jean-Claude Brialy is the wife's paramour. Thank you. Jean-Claude Brialy, he's 23 years old in this. When he died, he had been credited for starring in appearing in over 100 films, so he was a super talent at the time. And what I'd like to draw everyone's attention to, and I'll do my best to point it out when we get to the part at the end. The final cocktail party is very important because you remember lightweight cameras allowed people, the directors, to shoot in their friends' homes. The apartment that the cast live in is Claude Chabrol's Paris apartment. You will see at the cocktail party Claude Chabrol talking with Jean-Luc Godard, Francois Truffaut is there, Jacques Duvet, Eric Romer. They're all extras in the cocktail party, making these wonderful cameo appearances. So please enjoy. The first film is 30 minutes, and we'll talk again after this one comes to its conclusion. Thank you. Glad you enjoyed. Sorry to disrupt it at the end, but it's interesting to point out all those great directors who are in the apartment. Our next film is by Jean-Luc Godard. It predates Breathless by a year. It's 12 minutes long. It's called Charlotte en son Jules. Charlotte and her boyfriend Jules. It stars two characters, Jean-Paul Belmondo and Anne Collette. And what's interesting about this picture is that it was shot on silent, black and white silent film, which was not uncommon in this particular period, and the dialogue was added in post-production afterwards. And what's interesting about this is that the actors really had to know their script and memorize it verbatim. So when the text was added in post-production, the person reading the script, the actor, the lips would match, the lips of the actor would match the words that were being heard over the picture. You understand what I'm saying? I'm not articulating it very well. But what's interesting, synchronized. What's interesting about this is Jean-Paul Belmondo is not reading his script. It's the voice of Jean-Luc Godard. So when you see Belmondo speaking, you're actually hearing Godard's voice. And with that, we're going to play the second film. This is 12 minutes long. The next film that we're going to see is the shortest of our films. It's 2 minutes long, and it's an excerpt from a feature film. So it's a film within a film. In Hamlet, there was a play within the play. In the next film, this is in the feature of the next film that we're going to see. The two characters go to the movies to a silent film retrospective, and this is the movie that they see at the retrospective. Now this was created by Agnès Varda, and it stars Jean-Luc Godard. You will see him without his dark sunglasses, for one of the only times you'll ever see him without dark sunglasses. He's styled to look like Buster Keaton, and his co-star is his wife, Anna Karina, who in 2018 has been awarded the distinction of Knight of the French Legion of Honor. And you may know she just died in December. And as a matter of fact, tomorrow, the Film Forum will be hosting an Anna Karina retrospective from tomorrow until the end of the month. So if that's something you're interested in, you'll be able to see some of the feature films that feature her. Jean-Claude Brialy plays one of the medics that comes to the rescue. You'll remember he was the power mower in the first film. And the piano music that we're going to hear was improvised by Michel Legrand. Michel Legrand, of course, was the composer to the international hit song "The Windmills of Your Mind." So you'll see, you'll hear his accompaniment. And just as a side note, what's kind of interesting is when Jean-Luc Godard and Anna Karina were married, Agnès Varda, who started her career as a photographer, was their wedding photographer. Kind of interesting. So, off we go. This is the fiancés of the McDonald Bridge. Cute film. Godard really had an admiration and appreciation for Buster Keaton and for the early silent film stars and directors. And there's interview in 1980 where Jean-Luc is on the Dick Cavett show, and he's saying how much he was inspired by Buster Keaton and appreciated all of those early films. And just a quick side anecdote about Buster Keaton. There was a retrospective screening by Henri Langlois at the Cinémathèque Française. I forget the story right. And they were doing a Buster Keaton, or they were doing a silent film retrospective, and they were showing a Buster Keaton work, but they only had a Czechoslovakian print, and the intertitles were written in Czech. And at the end of the presentation, somebody complained to Henri Langlois and said, we couldn't understand what was going on because the intertitles were written in Czech. And he said, if you have to read the intertitles to understand what's going on in a Buster Keaton film, then... So, this is our final film for the evening. This is our only film that will be in color. This is a segment from a larger collaborative work by from 1965, where 6 directors contributed a short film. The title is Paris Seen by Jean-Daniel Paulet, Paris Seen by Jean-Luc Godard, Paris Seen by Claude Chabrol, etc. Most of the directors who contributed were editors at Cahiers at one time. And this clip is by Jean-Daniel Paulet. In the 1960s, the Rue Saint-Denis, which is the title of this last picture, was known for its seedy underbelly, particularly prostitution. And so this is the story of a 26-year-old inexperienced dishwasher and his affair with a much older prostitute who was 41 years old. And that role is played by Micheline Dax. And what's interesting about Micheline Dax is in 1989, she played the voice of the character Ursula in the French overdub of Disney's Little Mermaid, which is kind of interesting. So I will say thank you now for attending tonight. Hope you enjoyed the last film, and glad you all were able to come out on this freezing cold January evening. Thank you.